Today I'm in Dayton, Ohio, and we're walking the streets of the neighborhood where the Wright brothers lived. We're going to visit the sites of all 5 of their bicycle shops, including the only one still standing here in Dayton, the site where they built their very first airplane, and the lot where their home once stood. We'll also take a look at Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan, where 2 of the buildings are preserved today. So come along with me as we explore the neighborhood where aviation history took flight. Just before construction started on this building right here, the building that had been previously there was torn down. That building shared a wall with the building that had been there even prior to that, which had burned down years ago. That was the original bicycle shop of Orville and Wilbur Wright. Sat right here. Actually, their first 2 shops sat at this location. The Wrights had a tendency to move from location to location, all within this small neighborhood, within about a block. Partly for space, but more so for rent conditions. They were businessmen, and they didn't want their margin going to their landlord. So if they found a shop that was less expensive, they simply moved next door or down the street. The Park Service had tried to save, at one point, the building that had been right here. And the trouble was, they knew that the Wrights' shop had been here. And they knew that some portion of the building was original. But they came to realize there was really only one wall that was original, and they didn't even know which wall. And so somebody ended up getting the property. And it's not going to be a museum, obviously. And within this new construction, the Wright shop would have been more in this area here that doesn't have the facade on it yet. This right here is where they operated their first 2 bicycle shops. And later, they moved a very, very short distance right over here to where this empty plot is now. So this is the location of the 3rd Wright bicycle shop, Wright cycle shop. It says here on this faded sign, Wright bicycle shop site, 1893 to 1895. This building also burned down at some point in later years. So they went from right there, just right over to here. And then after that, the Wright brothers moved to their 4th shop, which was down this way. So as we walk down there, this over here, this is West 3rd Street. If you went the other direction, you would cross the Great Miami River and go into downtown. So the Wright brothers would have walked these streets daily. Down here on the left, this was their grocery store. And this is now part of the National Park Service. This has been turned into a museum, the Dayton Aviation Heritage National Historical Park. This entire building now is a museum for the Wright brothers. And yeah, this corner piece here, this was, in fact, the Wright brothers grocery store. Now part of the museum. And then right down here, in this building, just beyond that National Park sign, not National Park, but Park Service sign, was the 4th Wright brothers bicycle shop. This is the only bicycle shop that is still in Dayton. The other 3 are gone, they've been demolished. And the 5th one, the one where we're going to see in a moment, is up at Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan, Henry Ford's place, as a museum. They moved it from Dayton up to Michigan. This building had been converted into a residence. Just across the street over here, a photograph was taken back in the days that the Wrights had this shop of a lady with a cat. And that was the only photograph that existed, known photograph that existed, of this bicycle shop. And in the early 80s, the Park Service found out that this building was here, that it was going to be demolished, and they bought the house and converted it back to its original condition, at least based on the photograph and educated guesses.
Right? And then you have this sort of project manager.
And so all of this now is owned by the Park Service. And so from here, I'm going to take you down to the location of the fifth shop. That fifth shop is the famous location where the very first controllable airplane, heavier than air aircraft, was built. So this right here was the location of the fifth shop. It favored the left side, so there was another building that was sitting here. The Wright shop was right over here, and that is where the very first airplane was built. So the building that is now up at the Henry Ford, or at Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. This building, this is now in Michigan. It was moved in 1936. You can see there was the lot over here contained another building. So the bicycle shop sat in here, and I would say about a third of the way back to the alleyway is about where the shop portion was of that building where the airplane was built.
And the airplane was built in sections within this room and never fully assembled until it was in Kitty Hawk.
Today, the city of Dayton, and I think the Park Service as well, pretty much hate that this building was moved up to Dearborn, Michigan. At the time, in 1936, you have to understand that it was still in the heart of the Great Depression. So people had other things on their minds besides where some old building was going to end up. You think Henry Ford at the time was more like a Elon Musk or Bill Gates, somebody very, very wealthy, famous for his wealth. He came in, he grabbed it, and they took it on up to Michigan. There were sort of three sides to it. There were those people who were up in arms about it, those people who were proud, actually, that Henry Ford, the great Henry Ford, was going to take something from Dayton, Ohio and put it in his prestigious museum. And then, like I say, there's a lot of people that just had other things going on and they weren't too worried about it.
So from here, I want to walk you back down past the corner grocery store, as well as their fourth shop that we saw a few moments ago, down to their home, down to the house that they had lived in since 1871. So this would have been the path that they took, either on foot or bicycle. They would have gone down this road toward their house. Their father was a church bishop. Their mother was a very intelligent, educated woman, and the family had 4 boys and 1 girl. And while the other 2 boys moved out, Orville and Wilbur continued living in the house down here with their sister Catherine, and even after their mother passed away, the father remained. The Wright brothers were relatively successful financially. They were by no means wealthy before the airplane, but certainly successful business owners thanks to their bicycle business. They had been involved in printing. They had a small newspaper at one point. In fact, they had a print shop just above the grocery store back there that we passed. Some of their earliest kite experiments took place within walking distance of here. These would have been smaller handheld kites, but even then they were already experimenting with different shapes and sizes well before the famous work down in Kitty Hawk. And they would commute from here down to Kitty Hawk each autumn.
While we're going down through here, I'd like to note the road, this old brick road. I would like to think that this was the road that was here during the Wright brothers' times, and that they would have walked on this road and perhaps ridden their bicycle on these bricks. I don't know how I would like riding a bicycle on these bricks. Then right here is the lot the Wrights lived on. Now the house is also up at Greenfield Village. They came originally for the shop, and while they were here they realized that the house was here as well. And they asked Orville about the house. What do you think we could do about this? Do you think we could get the house as well? You see the house up at Greenfield Village. Now this was when it was originally dedicated, as well as the 5th Wright shop where the airplane was built. The airplane was built back in this portion of the building. So this was more or less their showroom here, their workspace back in this area for the bicycles, and then back in this area was the area where they built the airplane. Here's a newspaper clipping of this exact site. Once Wright Shine, now just another lot. Dayton Journal, July 16th, 1937. There's a picture of Orville and Henry Ford. So Orville was at the dedication of the building, and he wanted to wait until Wilbur's birthday for the official dedication in honor of his late brother, who had died numerous years before him. He had been gone about 30 years, almost 30 years by then. And so yeah, this is where the house was, and you can see it kind of looks like a footer around the edge. That's where the house stood. And then there was actually another house here. I used to think that this was probably a corner house, but no, they were packed in here tighter than that. So there was a house here between the sidewalk and the Wright's house. Now the porch, the front porch of the Wright's home, is probably its most famous aspect because the Wrights, the brothers, built that porch themselves. The porch that is, of course, on the original house in Michigan, not this one.
And so all that's here today is a reproduction gate and a reproduction porch. But it's nice to see that at least the lot has been preserved and dedicated as a museum piece.
So we can kind of see, based on the foundation here, well, it's not really a foundation, but where it's outlined, the parlor of the home, the front room, was up in this area. And this was more or less the entryway of the house, sitting area, and the stairs ran up through here. And you went through a door and into the dining room. This is where the Wrights would have been eating their breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then back here was the kitchen. And then you would go out the back door.
And back here they would have had their shed, as well as back then they would have had an outhouse.
Behind the Wright brothers' house, they had this shed here. This is the shed where they had their darkroom. And in that darkroom, they developed the photograph of the first ever airplane flight. And I'll try not to be too loud here because this is somebody's home to my right. This house was, of course, taken up to Greenfield. And again, Dayton had lost one of its historic landmarks. People today are kind of irked by that, but I have an opinion that may not be that popular here in Dayton. So we'll walk back over and check out the museum. So my opinion on the buildings being moved is that I don't think they likely would have survived had they been here. Again, back in the 1930s, saving buildings was not on the priority list. And you had the Great Depression, and then later on, you know, neighborhoods get older, and they kind of, over time, degrade. This area was honestly a bit of a demilitarized zone at one time. During the 60s, this was an area of great civil unrest, we'll say. And a lot of the buildings, of course, that were here then are no longer here now. And without the proper conservation efforts, I'm not so sure that those buildings would have survived anyway. Today would be a different story, but there's always that lag in between historic events and when people realize, oh, that was something worth saving. Not always, sometimes you know, but the home of the Wright brothers just wasn't one of those things. And this shop here, this was also a Wright shop. It was very significant. The airplane wasn't built in it, but it was significant in that the Wright brothers had this as their shop, their bicycle shop. And yet nobody made really any effort until the 1980s to save it or preserve it. It had become a residence, a private residence. There was nobody here to protect it, and that was, 80 years after the first airplane flight, 30 some years after Orville had passed. I was here last fall and toured this museum, and at the time I remember the rangers telling me that they were short-staffed. I can only imagine what they're dealing with now with the kind of the politics that have affected the National Park Service.
So I would consider this more of an interpretive center than a museum. When I think of a museum, I think of a place with historical artifacts. That's not really what this is. This space is more about telling the story of the Wright brothers, how they grew up, how they interacted with the community, the neighborhood. It explores the significance of their invention and places in the context of other innovations throughout history here. They have a mock-up here of the grocery store that once stood on this site, set up to reflect the time period when the Wright brothers were in the area. And if you look through this window and down between the buildings, you can see the site of the Wrights' fifth bicycle shop, the one where they built the airplane. Walking back through here, there's an exhibit about their printing business. The print shop was, of course, located just upstairs above the grocery store, and there's a mock-up up there of that space as well. We'll go take a look at that. This section highlights the beginnings of their aviation work. There's a model here demonstrating how the wing warping technology worked. They would lie in this cradle and slide their body left or right, and that motion was connected by cables to the wings, and they would warp or bend, allowing the plane to roll. They also have a mock-up here of the original engine used in the first airplane, as well as a mock-up of one of their hand-carved propellers. They actually designed and then carved their own propellers. And then upstairs, there is the recreated version of the print shop. And again, from the window up here, you can look through and see the site of their bicycle shop. There's also a bit about the family, the 4 boys and 1 girl. Orville lived into old age. Wilbur had died in 1912. And Orville moved with his sister Catherine to a mansion in the Oakwood area just south of downtown Dayton. He lived there for the rest of his life, and many of those years with Catherine until she eventually married. And Orville continued to tinker and invent well into his later years. One of his last major projects was restoring the original 1905 Wright Flyer, which you can now see here in Dayton area at Carillon Park. That is the second oldest airplane in existence on Earth. And that's what I have to share with you today. So I know that there's not a lot left here in terms of original structures, but when you hear the Wright brothers, you hear oftentimes they were from Dayton, Ohio. And I just would wonder, where in Dayton exactly was that? Can you still visit these places? Is there anything still there? And this neighborhood helps to answer those questions over 120 years after the first flight. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you down the road.